Well, as it turns out, the Manchester derby was the perfect opportunity for a Sunday afternoon nap. Both teams looked pretty toothless, but that's been a season-long problem for Manchester United in particular. Ruben Amorim's side sit 13th in the table, but they're even lower on 15th and goals scored, which is 37 from 31 Premier League games. So, Mark, it's obviously top of their shopping list this summer. Who have they identified and why?
Well, as we know that United haven't got a lot of money to spend, but they probably have a little bit more than people expect. But within that, they've got a couple of priorities. They definitely want a striker, maybe a midfielder and a wing back. But the striker's the number one priority because, like you say, that the goal situation is pretty dire. They're going to have to score 17 goals in the last 7 games to match their worst ever Premier League total of 54. So that's how bad they've been. You know, Rob and I were sat at Old Trafford on Sunday watching Rasmus Højlund do his best to impersonate a competition winner that's won the chance to play for Man United because he was, just not very good. Joshua Zirkzee is the same. So I've been told that they've identified Liam Delap as the favoured target for a variety of reasons. One, he's had a great season in the Premier League and he's got real potential. He's 22, so he's a good age profile. But he's also available for around £40 million if Ipswich get relegated. So that looks pretty likely. It'd be a lot cheaper than Viktor Gyökeres at Sporting Lisbon, who obviously has got a relationship with Ruben Amorim. Benjamin Sesko, as we know, has got interest from elsewhere. Arsenal, Bayern Munich, other clubs that could offer Champions League football are in the running for Sesko. Victor Osimhen is another target, but there are question marks over Sesko, over Osimhen, and over Gyökeres in terms of, could he provide value for money at 26, having already had a chance in the English division with Coventry back a couple of years ago. So Delap is the guy that they favour. There is a situation in Man City whereby City have a £40 million buyback option, but I've been told they're not going to trigger that or unlikely to trigger that because Erling Haaland signed a 9.5-year contract in January. So if they were going to sign Delap back, they would have to give him a substantial contract to do so. And then it wouldn't be a case of signing him and selling for £80 million. It doesn't work like that. They'd have to pay up his contract. So City also benefit from a 20% sell-on clause of any profit. So Delap fits a lot of options for United. And also we know that Chelsea are interested. But in terms of what United have got to spend, what they're looking at, the profile that Amorim wants, Delap is a player that fits the bill.
I mean, the question for both of you, I'll come to you, Rob, maybe with this first. I mean, it's obvious that United needs more firepower. But a number 9 isn't necessarily a panacea, is it? I mean, this is not exactly a team that's creating chance after chance and is just lacking a centre forward to put them away. I mean, the problems are more fundamental than that, aren't they? They can't just think they're going to get a number 9 and everything will be rosy in the garden.
And that is the danger. The lack of goals is an issue that predates Amorim. It was an issue for Erik ten Hag, particularly even before Erik ten Hag. I mean, just looking at the stats in the last sort of 3 years, they average around sort of 58 league goals a season, which for a supposed top level team is just nowhere near when you think of the likes of City and Liverpool regularly sort of topping or getting close to 100 league goals every season. It's nowhere near, and you're right. It's not necessarily an issue that United are creating all of these chances and they just haven't got anyone to put the ball in the net. That is part of it, and United strikers do miss a lot of chances. I mean, just watching the game on Sunday, United probably have had the chances to win the game. Thinks of the one that falls to Garnacho, and Dorgu has one. So there are chances that are being created. But it's not necessarily just the final piece of the puzzle, and it's interesting. I was on this pod a couple of weeks ago talking about that the transfer room forum in Berlin. One of the agents who is representing a striker who it looks like he's going to move in the summer was there and was talking about Man United, and he said he would be reluctant to take his player to Man United at the moment because it's a really difficult place for players to thrive at the moment, particularly centre forwards, and the danger is that you end up being someone like a Rasmus Højlund or a Joshua Zirkzee. Now, Rasmus Højlund at the time was probably one of the brightest young prospects in Europe at the time. Now, United, admittedly, even themselves admit that they've overpaid for him. But he's been at United now for 2 years. And if there was a situation where another centre-forward comes in at Man United in the summer, you're looking at Rasmus Højlund possibly moving on for an absolute fraction of the price that he joined United for, with his reputation completely in bits. And that is a danger. That is a danger for players that come to Man United at the moment.
I don't think they'd move him on. I think he would be a second choice striker, which they need. They need the numbers. They couldn't just bring in Delap and offload the forwards. But I think it's about more than just goals. I think you're right. A goal scorer won't solve the problem. It's about having a centre forward who can play as a centre forward. Who can hold the ball up, who can, when you watch United at the moment, the ball comes straight back. Neither Højlund or Xerxes can hold the ball up, which means that the defensive midfielders are under constant pressure, which is why they can't dominate games. They concede so many goals. If you had a striker like Delap, who can hold the ball up, or he can turn his man, or he can lay the ball off to his wingers, it would alleviate so much pressure and enable United to play better. So it's part of the jigsaw. They're not going to sign a Harry Kane or an Erling Haaland to put the ball in the back of the net 50 times a season, but they need a better centre forward. And right now, their options that they have are just simply not good enough. I've said this before, but I don't think Højlund would get in any of the teams outside the relegation zone. I think Xerxes are the same. But those two players have had to carry the burden of goals for Man United. So far this season, they've both scored 3 league goals. 3 league goals. Højlund scored 1 goal in 24 games. That was against Leicester. So they're so far out of the depth, it's untrue. So they have to replace him. They have to replace Xerxes and Højlund with a striker. And it has to be the first part of the process, but it is about more than just goals.
Well, look, 30-odd years ago, Newcastle had a centre-forward that was tearing up the league in Andy Cole. And there was only one place he went to, and that was Manchester United. Now we've got Alexander Isak, who's doing the same at Newcastle, 30 years on. And Manchester United are not even in the conversation about whether he could move or not. And I know Newcastle want to keep him, and I know Newcastle fans get irritated about the idea that Isak's definitely going to leave at some point. But let's just speculate on that. Potential Liverpool, Arsenal, those are the 2 Premier League alternatives for him. What does it say about where United are and how careful they have to be themselves as a club in the market? They just are not in the conversation for a player at the top level, and they are having to shop sort of lower down, if you like, with all the risk that comes with that.
Well, that's the reality of where they are. Alexander Isak wouldn't even think about going to Man United, would he?
We've seen that recently, with Declan Rice, Jude Bellingham. It used to be the case under Fergie, even quite close to the end of Fergie, where United would be a big enough club to go and pluck the best player in the league from all these clubs. You just think of Michael Carrick, for example, at Tottenham. Tottenham are a big club, and Michael Carrick was one of their best players. And Fergie went to Tottenham and went, "We're having him," and he went, and that was just the end of it. And those days are gone now, and it has made the part of the reason, or the biggest issue, the biggest reason United are in this mess financially and sporting level is because of recruitment. They just haven't got recruitment right. They've struggled to adapt to the shifting sands of the transfer market. Like not being able to just go and pluck the best Premier League players anymore. And it means that to get back to a level that they want to get back at, they're going to have to make a lot of correct decisions very, very quickly. And recruitment is tough at the best of times. I think I've said on this podcast before that, United have said in the past that your big clubs have sort of said, signing new players is so tough that we look to get around 70% of our decisions right. Well, United probably can't afford to get 70% of their recruitment decisions right. It needs to be 95, 99. You need to get all of these decisions right again and again and again to get back to the top.
I think United are where Liverpool were in 2017. So it was Jurgen Klopp had been at the club for about 18 months, and they had to start, rebuilding. And they signed that summer Mo Salah, who at that point was a Chelsea reject, had been to Italy, got to Fiorentina, to Roma, going for early £30 million. Gino Wijnaldum had been relegated with Newcastle. Andy Robertson had been relegated with Hull. They were taking chances on players, but because they had good people in their recruitment department, they realised that these players were going to provide a lot more value than people realised. So that's where United are. And it really worked for Liverpool, but they probably got 95% of their deals right. Naby Keita didn't prove it to be that good, but obviously Salah, Wijnaldum, Robertson, amazing signings. And United need to do that again. And I'm not saying Liam Delap will be another Mo Salah. That's not going to happen. But what they need, and they haven't had this in any kind of concept for the last 10 years, they need a player to go to Man United and actually improve. I think Bruno Fernandes is the one player they've signed, and Rob might be able, you guys have a think. Since Alex Ferguson left in 2013, how many players have gone to Man United and become better players? Good luck with that one.
Well, so, in that context then, and I know we talked about the importance of the Europa League to Manchester United season before, but do you get a sense that they're having to create 2 plans for this summer, basically? One is if they've got Champions League football that they can offer to potential new signings, and also obviously the revenue that comes with that, and one without. Do you get a sense that there are 2 different plans? Is it that seismic a change to whether they manage to win the Europa League or they don't in terms of next steps?
Yeah, well, we sat down. The Manchester reporters went to London for the stadium announcement, and we had a briefing with Omar Barada, and at the end we were allowed to ask questions that weren't necessarily related to the stadium. And one of the questions was, in terms of transfer budget, is it literally Plan A for Champions League and Plan B for no European football? Now, Barada initially was quite reluctant to kind of say, yes, we've got one list for the Champions League and another list. But the more he kind of answered, it kind of proved that they do have two lists, because it is that bigger deal in terms of the budget that may be available for new players, but also the way that they even attract new players, because players like Liam Delap is probably going to have an awful lot of options in the summer. There are an awful lot of clubs looking for strikers, United, Chelsea potentially, Arsenal almost certainly. If you're deciding your next step, again, it's one of those situations where in the past, a young striker in the Premier League, it would be an absolute no-brainer to go to Man United, and that's just not the case anymore. So if you're faced with a choice, possibly, I'm not suggesting Arsenal. I mean, obviously, James, you'll know more whether Arsenal are actually in or not for him. But if you're faced with a choice between Man United and Arsenal can offer you Champions League football, but Man United can't, that's quite a big thing for a player. So I do get the sense there are two lists. I think that a lot depends on whether they win the Europa League and what kind of budget they have. Again, it's whatever the budget is and whatever kind of prospects that they can offer these new players. They just have to get these decisions right, because they just can't afford any more false dawns and poor choices.
I think there are three lists. The two lists that you mentioned, a list that also covers how many players can get out of the door. Can Marcus Rashford, can Anthony, can Casemiro be offloaded? Because if they can, that'll free up a lot of money in terms of fees and in terms of the wage bill. If Kobbie Mainoo and Garnacho are part of that conversation, I think Garnacho more likely than Kobbie Mainoo. But if Rashford and Garnacho are allowed to leave, as we know they're homegrown players, that could generate 60, 70 million in terms of pure profit, as they say. So there's two lists. There's a no European football whatsoever. There's win the Europa League and Champions League, and there's also that kind of caveat as to how many players they can get out, what they can raise for those players, and how much they can get off the wage bill, because that could be the most significant element of all, because they've got a lot of players that are still draining the wage bill that haven't delivered.
And just finally then on this, we've sort of touched on it, but how much do we feel that there's going to be a sort of striker merry-go-round this summer? We talked about United. We know Chelsea want a forward. We know Arsenal want a forward. Liverpool probably want a forward. There's a lot of names out there. It does feel as though, to me, that there could be a bit of a domino effect this summer, that one moves and then two or three could follow. What's the sense you guys are getting? Rob first.
I think so. I mean, I think we've seen in transfer windows in the past where maybe there's one. I mean, strikers are obviously always at a premium. I think it's quite rare for so many top clubs to potentially be in the market for one particular position. Now, those clubs will tell you that they're probably looking at different profiles, that the type of striker maybe that Arsenal are looking for is different possibly to the type of striker that United are looking for. But there just aren't that many goal scorers in Europe at all. There are even fewer of the right kind of profile to make a move. You're looking at players between the sort of ages of 21 and maybe 24, 25, 26. There are even fewer of those. There are even fewer of those who are actually available. So you're looking at a really kind of tiny pool for United, Chelsea, Liverpool to all get, Arsenal to all get these players in during the summer. And it could just take one move. A club gets a load of money in a transfer fee, then goes and invests that somewhere else. We have seen in the past that these transfer windows obviously spark interaction with one deal. And I do think there could be some, a striker sort of merry-go-round, particularly with those Premier League clubs, and particularly because all strikers are a premium. Everyone will tell you that the hardest thing in football is to score goals. To find someone who can do that regularly at the right price, at the right wages is really tough to find. So if there are a few of those players floating around, it wouldn't surprise me if a few of those clubs decided to go into the market for strikers this summer.
I think that this could all start with Darwin Núñez at Liverpool. I think Liverpool let Darwin Núñez go. And I think that Salah will stay, but if he doesn't, then you're talking Liverpool really need a striker. But I think Darwin Núñez will leave Liverpool, which means they will have to replace him. And then you're looking at what happens to Ollie Watkins at Aston Villa. Obviously Arsenal made a cheeky late bid for him. Will Arsenal go back in for Ollie Watkins? United really no need a striker. Harry Kane situation, I think he's probably going to stay at Bayern Munich, but there's a potential that he could be prized out of this summer if the club makes the right offer. Arsenal, the striker, there are so many potential options. What's going to happen to Osimhen? Because obviously Napoli want to get him off the books as well. So absolutely, I think this year is the summer of the strikers, and I think it could all start with Nunes at Liverpool, and that could lead to a lot of things, a lot of deals being done.
Yeah, I mean Osimhen, Chelsea put in quite a bit of work late in the day with Osimhen before he went to Turkey, and I do wonder whether that is a deal they may look to revive. I mean, Arsenal have. It's funny, the sort of some of the fallout from the whole Ollie Watkins situation is it's all been presented to me now that it was actually Villa who were driving that. And Villa was sort of suggesting, look, we need to move on one of Watkins and Duran. And obviously the conversations were going on with the Saudi club at the same time that Arsenal was talking to Villa about Watkins. And so I'm not sure whether that situation potentially will be revived in the summer. They've done a lot of work on Benjamin Sesko. He's certainly been the player that they've tracked, I would say, most fervently over the last 12 months or so. Arteta likes Isak, but I think the sort of mood music around Isak is that he's not going to go anywhere in the summer except for a stellar bid, which I'm not sure Arsenal would necessarily do now because they've got one or two other positions that they also need to strengthen. So that might sort of curtail that. Which leaves Gyökeres, and he's not someone who's just appeared on their radar out of nowhere. But I think because of the sort of shifting sands elsewhere, I think Gyökeres is becoming a little bit more of an option for them as time goes on.